Rambam had said earlier that there's no creature that walks the face of the earth that's more impressionable than the human being. And that's why environment is crucial in terms of what affects us. You're in a positive environment, you're affected positively. You're in a negative environment, unless you're able to seclude yourself and sequester yourself, not to be exposed to all the negativity, corrupt values, perverted behavior. The Rambam said earlier, even if you have to go into a cave to be all by yourself, to go out in the desert, not to be exposed, because ultimately, if you allow yourself to be exposed, ultimately that's what you're going to become. Let's say you live in a community where the fare of the day is gossip. People are gossiping. And unfortunately, a good part of the society, I mean, it's at various levels. Some people, it's, as they used to say, there was an expression among Jews, you shouldn't fall in this guy's mouth. If you ever fall in his mouth, forget about it. No, better you should be, what's your name? What's your address? I prefer not to say. Because the moment this man, he puts his hook into you, wherever he goes, he drags you through the mud. And you don't want to be dragged. So, but if you live in that kind of community, what are you supposed to do? So Rambam writes, Kol Elohim Balei Lashon Hara. All these people we've discussed are involved in irresponsible speech, Lashon Hara, bad speech, as we explained the various applications. Also, we're number 6. You're not permitted to live in the neighborhoods. But definitely to sit with them and hear what they have to say. You shouldn't even be in their communities, but to sit and listen to what they say. The fate of the Jews was sealed in the desert. We wanted 40 years. Because they accepted the false reports and how the spies had bad-mouthed God. And they said, God has taken us into a death trap, and the Jews believed it. Therefore, that whole generation was condemned to die. They did not merit to go into the land of Israel, the land of Canaan. So we're not sitting with them. No. You go to a restaurant. Recently, I paid a Shiva visit. This family, I haven't seen some of them for many years. The woman who passed away, she was a woman in her upper 90s. She was a friend of my mother's, so I wanted to pay a Shiva visit. It's in 5 towns, so I went to 5 towns. And I'm sitting there, all of a sudden, a nephew of theirs comes in, and which is the first cousin of the children. The man is a doctor, a dermatologist, so-called observant Jew. And he says to me, I know your brothers, but you and I don't know. Okay, thank God. And then he starts chewing my ear off with all kinds of, I don't want to use the word nonsense, stupidity. And I can't pay an appropriate Shiva call because the man is chewing my ear with all kinds of nonsense. He's telling me, do you know about this, about that? I say, no, the truth is, I'm not interested in knowing about whatever you're telling me. I'm here for a purpose. I want to do my duty, which is the right thing, and speak to the people who are sitting Shiva and to console them. This person doesn't take a no for an answer. She just keeps going and going. I couldn't focus. You go into a restaurant, you sit down at a table. Years ago, you could sit, somebody else is sitting at the table. We're talking about a diner, kosher diner. Somebody's sitting there. He wants to strike up a conversation. You may not be interested in talking to this person because you'll be cordial. But more than that, you don't want to get involved. You don't want to hear what he has to offer. Because it's inevitable he's going to say things which are so inane and have no value, besides things which may be forbidden to even listen to. You don't want to go there. And you have to be careful. A person goes to shul, they have shul, unfortunately, they have a thing called the Kiddush Club. They take a break. When the rabbi gives a sermon, they go downstairs, and as the scotches, one malt scotches, they come out, you can buy a scotch for $600 a bottle. and they serve at these kiddush clubs, that kind of scotch. I'm not even talking about them becoming alcoholics, these people. What do you think they talk about at this kiddush club? Are they talking Torah? Are they talking mitzvahs? Are they talking about philanthropy? Or are they speaking about who didn't give philanthropy? Right? You don't want to be in that environment. You don't want to be exposed to that, because if they can take a break and they have no regard for the rabbi when he says a sermon, what is that level of sensitivity regarding somebody else's feelings or sharing information which is not positive? You want to stay clear with these kinds of people. No, there's an expression, where there's smoke, there's fire. You see certain behavior patterns, stay clear. Because if this is a level of disrespect, what do you think if this is the rabbi, what does he say about other people? Or not the rabbi? Responsibility to your children, to be the positive role model, to nurture them, to provide them with all the positive amenities of life, that they should be able to navigate life based on what you taught them. Values, perspectives, behavior, all this. Now, this is a tough one. Your child goes to school, and your child comes home, little boy, 5 years old, girl. The child's sulking. Why? Because I always give something to this other child, and now that I asked them to give me, they didn't want to give me. I share with them, they don't want to share with me. So what does the father say to the child? Next time when they want, don't give them. They don't do for you, don't do to them. Is that a proper approach? Is that proper mentoring of the child? We'll see in a moment. There's a negative commandment. A Jew is not permitted to take revenge. If I can do something and I choose not to do it because you didn't do it for me, that's taking revenge. There's Torah violation, you're not permitted to take revenge. What about if you tell your child, although that child didn't give you, you give them and say, look, I'm better than you are, because although you denied me, I will provide. It's a negative commandment. You're not permitted to harbor ill feeling. By making that kind of comment, you're harboring ill feeling that you were denied, and you'll be better than that person, therefore you are giving. Torah violation. So when you raise a child and the child comes back sulking or crying, that the child was ignored and abused or whatever it is, if it's a question of defending yourself, of course, you have a right to defend yourself. But this approach, if they don't do for you, tit for tat, you don't do for them, that's a Torah violation. And many things we tell our children which are not appropriate and not proper. It's not. You say, unfortunately, the child's immature, child doesn't understand. You be better. Somebody asks you, you do for them. Don't tell them. If they don't do for you, you don't do for them. That's the wrong approach. It's interesting, many years ago, when you raise children, very often, unless you raise them right, you can never win. You can never win with you. Why? Because whenever there's a problem, they always fault the parent. It's your fault because you didn't this. If a parent truly is dedicated to his children, and I always say, no parent has a PhD in child rearing. We make mistakes. We mean well. We want to do what's in the best interest of our children. Are we always perfect? Look, we're not angels. We're not experts. And the scenarios keep changing. We make mistakes. And if you understand people are not perfect, you make mistakes. There's no basis to find fault and fault the parent because of whatever it may be. Despite that, you yourself being an adult, you have to rise to the occasion and deal with it regardless. Not try to point the blaming finger at your parent or whoever else that may be. Many people, they abandoned Judaism because of certain things. Because they weren't acknowledged. They came to shul. Rabbi didn't look at him, didn't say good Shabbos with a smile. whatever it is. And everybody has his reason why he walked out the door. They didn't give you the time of day. You understand? We're not saying it was right that they didn't give it, that they were insensitive to you. But is that sufficient reason to abandon your Judaism and walk out the door? So the person says, I think it is. You know something? After 120 years, when you come before God and you offer that to God, is that going to hold water? If it's right, it's right. If Judaism is the right thing for you, what are you blaming the rabbi? The rabbi has nothing to do. Judaism is right in its own right. It has nothing to do with the rabbi. Rabbi made a mistake or the rabbi failed. But in terms of the decision you have to make, despite that, you can't abandon it. You can't turn your back on it. So you always have to think, is this really sufficiently valid that I'm extricating myself from this? Because most often the because has no value. 99% of the time has no value. Is it a distraction? Is it a test? It's a test. But bottom line, if you understand what it's all about, and God makes that decision, you want to be in a safe place. And therefore, despite that, you let it run off your back and just keep doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I went to elementary school in the 50s. And the school I went to was on the Lower East Side. It had over 1,200 kids. It was a big school. And I'm not sure what PS 69 in Brooklyn had, but that's where Larry went. By then he was maybe in Stuyvesant already, or in Brooklyn Tech, I'm not sure, in Bronx Science, I'm not sure where he went. He had to read 16 numbers backwards and vertically and backwards, and then he got it, I don't know where. Okay. So 1,200 kids, a lot of kids. Many of the children were children of Holocaust survivors. And the parents weren't really that observant. They weren't. But they were traditional. And many of the families were Americans. It's not the fathers really were steeply involved in Torah Judaism. They were observant Jews. But when you're on the cusp of Judaism and you educate children and you don't treat them with kid gloves, the way you should teach as a teacher, that child is walking out the door. And many of the teachers were Holocaust survivors. They didn't have patience. We're talking about their middle-aged people. They had patience for nobody. You can imagine how little patience they had for these kids who weren't interested in learning. 50% of the children became non-observant. 30%, definitely. Why? I'm not blaming anybody, but the environment was not an attractive environment. To be an observant Jew was not that attractive. It's easy to give it up, go somewhere else, especially if you have an excuse. I was mistreated. Unfortunately, these people were victims. These children were victims of their experiences. As a result of that, you have an obligation, even down the road, to rethink many things. Now that you're mature and understand, was that really a sufficiently valid reason to walk out the door? And that's why recall is so important. Memory is so important. To rethink the mistakes you made in your life. And many times, things are correctable. Sometimes they're not correctable. Person made many choices, give you a case, and because they married a non-religious woman from a secular background, the only way he could go back, he has to divorce his wife, which is not an easy thing. And his wife, no way, is coming on board to observe Judaism. His kids, he didn't raise them right. They have no interest in Judaism. He's going to alienate his children. You know something? It's a tough nut to crack. It's not easy. Your wife, your children, I could go back, but what's the cost factor? Again, I'm not telling what the person should do, what he should not do. When a person was a tzaddik, he became a Baal Tshuva later. And came to Yad Avram, and he used to recruit people to come to lectures and classes. And he became observant. He was a trust attorney. And he became observant. And his wife was very educated. And the couple was in the mid-70s. And he wanted to eat kosher. He used to get up in the middle of the night to eat cereal, kosher cereal, because his wife would ever catch him eating kosher cereal. I don't think he'd be able to swallow it. And his wife would not tolerate it. He could afford to buy kosher chicken. They're eating chicken. Buy kosher chicken. Till now, we ate this chicken. Purdue, you eat Purdue. That's the way it was. So what's the alternative? He had 2 sons, both of them married out. Married non-Jews. And they were geniuses as kids. They went to Princeton, one, and the other went somewhere else. And they were in their 50s. And they were very accomplished. And I remember I went to pay a Shiva visit. The sons were sitting Shiva, not the 7 days, but they sat appropriate Shiva. And the wife says to me, why don't you take my tefillin, my son's, my wife's, my husband's tefillin, we have no use for it. Give it to somebody who could use it. You'd say you want to keep it. She wanted nothing to do with it. Understand? That kind of attitude, that person you're not going to bring back so easily. And her husband was a tzaddik, was a good man. It's not, he was a fanatic. He's a man who earned a very good living. He's a man that was respected. He's a man that was loved by everyone. But yet, it wasn't her cup of tea. For him to say to his wife, I'll give you an ultimatum. Either you come on board, I'm out of here. Tough nut to crack. It's not going to happen. But again, on the day of reckoning, 120 years, Hashem is going to present every one of us. What about this? What about that? And we have to be ready to answer those questions. And that's what life's all about. We try to do our best, so when we're confronted, I'll give you an example. Person has an order by the IRS. You meet with your accountant, and you meet with your tax lawyer to prepare for your best when you're going to be, and then you're going before the judge. And it could even be a criminal issue. Understanding that it could be a criminal issue, because you relied on certain loopholes, which were unreliable. You don't want to hear the music, especially when you're tone deaf. You don't want to hear the music. Okay? And you'll go and you'll try to construct a case why you should be found innocent, and even the United States, you get a slap on the wrist with a fine. If you think it's going to be different for every one of us, but again, 2 people are not the same, like I explained to Larry. Where he's coming from, where I'm coming from, we come from different worlds. For somebody, a person could be hit over the head. The other person, they get just a snap at the ear. That's it, nothing more than that. Of course, they come from different backgrounds. But wherever we come from, we all know we're not perfect. Every one of us. Knowing we're not perfect, we try to right as much as we wronged to right what we wronged, to make it better. So the Rambam writes, Hanokiv michavero, first takes revenge from his fellow, over blotase, in violation of negative commandment. Shenemar, lo sikom, don't take revenge. Now, the Chofetz Chaim writes something interesting. Let's say you go to a person and you say, I'd like to borrow $100, $1,000. And he turns you down. And now that person comes to you, can I borrow money? And the person doesn't lend the money because he didn't lend it. That's revenge. What about he lends him to lend, but he doesn't lend him the amount of money that he would have lent him if he wouldn't have turned him down? So the reason why he's lending him less, and the one who's receiving the money doesn't know it. He says, I'm sorry, right now I can't do more than this. And he's very happy to receive 3/4 of his request. But he doesn't know, the recipient, that the reason why he's getting less is because the one who's giving him the money has a gripe against him, and that's the reason why he's giving him less. Chofetz Chaim writes he's in violation of revenge. The reason why you're giving him not what he asked less is because, and he says something even more than that. Normally, when you would give it to him, you would give it to him with a smile, with warmth. You give him everything he's asking for, but not with the same level of graciousness, to make him feel that it's your pleasure to accommodate his request. And he doesn't even know the difference. But factually, you're holding back on the way you normally would lend him the money. You're satisfying his full request. You're in violation of revenge or harboring a new feeling in your heart. You're letting that resonate and disrupt your feelings because he didn't do for you. You understand what this is? Positive command, you must love your fellow Jew as you love yourself. If, let's say, your son, we're always forgiving to our children, especially if they're good children. Nobody's perfect. And even if you ask your son to do something he didn't do it, or your daughter, they didn't do it. They ask you to do something, you're happy to do it for them. It's not there's any grudges or bad feeling. It's your child. You should love your fellow as you love yourself. If he's worthy of the loan, he's worthy of the favor, why don't you give it with the same graciousness? It would be a child, why don't you do it with the same graciousness, with the same good feeling? So evidently, there's a little bit of a holdback here. So really, it all goes back to V'aftarecha kamocha. If we would love one another the way we should love one another, all these issues, revenge, harboring ill feeling, there wouldn't be issues. But unfortunately, we're not there. It's not so simple. Because we see people so critically, and we see all their shortcomings, which sometimes upset you. And therefore, you don't even want to get started with that kind of person. Especially if he slighted you and offended you, definitely you don't want to get involved with him. Person supports a certain institution, Torah institution. Now, why do you support it so significantly? Because you value what they teach. You value what they accomplish. The head of the institution, you meet him on the street, and he doesn't acknowledge you. And he treats you as if you're like an ordinary guy. And you're giving substantial money to this institution. Now, you may be slighted, but the person says, if he could treat me the way he does, after all I've done for his institution, you know something? I'm going to cut my donation in half. I've had this. People said, you hear what happened? I said, let me ask you a question. When you supported the institution, as you did, graciously and generously, was it because the man gave you honor? It's because of what the Torah institution represented. Today, did they represent anything less? No. So if the reason why initially you support is because they represented what you valued, and they do represent that, so because the man didn't acknowledge you, and you felt he should have, because, why is that a reason to cut your donation in half and not support the institution as you supported it before? You know what the answer is? One thing has nothing to do with it. It's ego. That's what it is. It's all ego. If it's based on what you value, continue supporting no less. Well, I can find another institution. I don't have to make this man's life easy. It's not to make the man's life easier. If it's appropriate and they need the money to be able to carry on what they're doing, and it's the right thing, what does one thing have to do with another? It has nothing to do with it. But people are complicated. We're all complicated. And we're all affected by this. He says, Alpha Bishen Alokolov, although one is not subject to Malkos, to lashes, Deo Rohi Admod, it's a corrupted characteristic on an extreme level. It's a very bad characteristic. Like a person has envy. Envy is corrosive. The Gemara says, a person who has kino, envy, person has anger, uncontrollable anger, the person's life's not a life. Wherever you turn, everything upsets you. You don't have a moment's peace. Whatever you see, you're envious. and you can't tolerate it. Envy just eats you up. What kind of life does this man have? Doesn't have a moment's peace. He's not satisfied. Everything bothers him. So, and that's what it's about. It's mida roma'od. Why is a person vengeful? Because I was turned down. It all goes back to ego. If I wanted, why did you do for me? You're going to pay for that. You're going to pay the price. I will not live that down. It all goes back to the same thing. But even to a lesser degree, as I explained, even if you give the same amount of money, but if the feeling is not the same, and it's obvious from your facial features, it's not with the same warmth, you're in violation of taking revenge. Because you're not offering him, as you offer him for with that warmth and generosity, and giving this as now because of what happened.